Usually like overnight success stories, they take 5 to 10 years, and that was like how mine worked. Like, like the first business was just like a like ideator for the second business. And then the second business took 5 years of frankly 100 hours a week, like, you know, like super like discipline, like focus, and execution, and a lot of luck, like I realized like I'm very lucky too. So, I think all those things being the case though, never did I think about giving up, because I knew the way the math would work out if I stayed committed to it. I believed in what I was doing and the service I was providing to the customers. And it turns out that the risk was worth it. It definitely paid off.
Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads, a weekly financial show for our generation. And for listeners, welcome back to the Long Game Podcast. We've got a special guest this week. I barely have any notes written down because I'm just excited for this conversation. But we are joined by Jason Wenk, who is the founder and CEO of Altruist, which is who we at All Street use as our main investment platform for clients. And he's built a couple large profitable businesses throughout his career. And he has a passion for making financial advice more accessible, which is right in line with like our own personal missions and why we started All Street. So we're going to dive into some of the stories and lessons that he's learned over the years. And I think the best way to start is with your origin story, because one, it's connected so much with me. Like I've listened to probably every interview that you've done, and I grew up in a small town, pursued entrepreneurship, and just kind of like in the process of trying to make it all happen right now. And you've kind of already gone through that journey and built successful businesses on like the back of believing in yourself and taking risks. So I think listeners will get a lot of value just hearing like what that beginning stage and everything looked like. So let's start there. What is the Jason Wenk origin story?
I'll try to give you a condensed one. I'm old, so my story is long now. It was less long when I was a young man, But so stoked to join you guys. I'm actually really excited for the business that you're building, and I love working with entrepreneurs. Like it's probably, if I would ever walked away from my own company today, like I'd want to spend the rest of my life just like working with other entrepreneurs and helping people kind of go from ideation to like the actual practical application of like building something and then scaling it. And I just find a ton of joy in that. But to start off, yeah, man, I'm from a small town in Western Michigan, so kind of a Midwesterner like you guys. I think there's a lot of truth to Midwest nice, like people are kind, back in the home state. So I had an awesome childhood, like just good, supportive people. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, so I had a very hardworking blue collar kind of upbringing, grew up on a farm. The funny story I tell people is that like I had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to get to school, which makes me sound like an 80-year-old grumpy, man or something. But there's a big ass gully between my house and like the bus stop. And so like I legit would have to like walk up the hill to get to the bus stop in the snow of Michigan in the winter. And then when I get dropped off, I have to walk back up the other side of that gully to get home. So, but it was a good upbringing. I'm like one of the oldest kind of like Zennials, I guess, out there. Right. So, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and what the significance of that is like, there was a massive sort of technological revolution that happened in the 90s. People started getting home computers for the first time. The internet, became more prevalent. People started getting it at school. Broadband was just kind of kicking off when I was like a later years in high school. So I was really, really sucked into like the potential of technology, like what it could do, because being from a small town, there wasn't a lot going on. Like you're either going to be like a farmer or work at a local factory, or, maybe you could be like a teacher, but like there wasn't like a breadth of like occupations. And even where I'm from, it was so rural that like there was not like cable TV, there was no social media back then, right? So you were really disconnected from the world, and the internet like just changed everything for me, because it was like, whoa, like the whole world is accessible now. Like knowledge is accessible. And so I became a self-taught kind of computer hacker. I would mess around with hardware. I would write my own applications. build kind of simple, kind of DOS prompt oriented, like very low fidelity, like games, Pong style type games, but like ones you can like play off a DOS prompt. And then once I had access to internet, then I got like just super stoked on like building like web-based applications. Early days, it was just building websites, but that was still cool. And then there was sort of like this, sort of like web application layer that was kind of, so that was like, upbringing, learn technology, and got really fascinated. Went to college, studied computer science, but um, uh, in my sophomore year, I got my then girlfriend pregnant, and I had a baby at 20 years old. It was wild.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I have a 21-year-old actually right now, and I'm only 41. But so pretty wild times. But that's kind of how I got into financial services, because I was like, maybe I should do something. Like I'm gonna have to like take care of another human being here. And I just so happened, I worked at a high-end golf course, like, kind of while I was in school. And one of the people there was a managing director at a big investment firm, and, kind of took a liking to me. We got talking about like the things I was doing. And he had this, a problem where he wanted to be able to, his company was just starting to use Microsoft Outlook for email, like to give you an idea of like the era. That's like right around like the year 2000 or so. And I remember him like complaining, and I was like, well, you could do this, and this. Like basically, he had like the company had like this like DOS oriented program for data, but they were using like Outlook for email. And I was like, well, why wouldn't you build essentially what's called an add-in, and we'll create a dropdown inside Outlook to pull that data. And now you don't have to like run queries every time you want to see like your client account balances. He was obviously financial industry. So that's how I got into financial services. I started building applications for this small, kind of like an office of like a huge international company that eventually opened up the doors to go work at Morgan Stanley, and moved to New York, and spent a couple of years getting indoctrinated to financial services. So anyway, that's how I got into it. Now from there, I've started a bunch of businesses. I got really jaded. Talk about like traditional Wall Street. Where I was from, most people didn't have a whole lot of money. So when I was working for this huge kind of brokerage firm, the division I was part of had a $20 million minimum. And so I was like, man, like who's got that kind of money? Like nobody has that kind of money, not where I'm from. And it just really dawned on me that like what I really, really wanted to do with my life, and like with the skills I had, was to work on things that worked for everybody, not just rich people. And I've spent now 20 years basically in pursuit of that, like starting different businesses along the way to try to figure out like how can we leverage technology to make advice more accessible, like good quality, like financial help and financial services, like accessible to more people. And it's been a ton of fun. So I, obviously I go on and on about like the different businesses, but it's been 4 different companies, sold 2 of them, and hired thousands of people and worked with hundreds of thousands of clients. Like it's been really, really cool, kind of a long kind of tail journey.
Yeah. And you also host a couple podcasts, which are absolutely great. The only one complaint I have is I wish they were longer. I think we've probably both listened to every podcast episode you on. You just have so much wisdom. So normally our podcasts are really directed to like actionable advice for people on financial topics. I think that's kind of like wasteful using like the knowledge that you have. So I think maybe start off a little bit about like maybe some lessons that you've learned while you scaled businesses that could be helpful for other people who are trying to scale, but they've been making some mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So one thing I would tell anybody who's an entrepreneur, like whether they're like a solopreneur, right, like just running a one-person service business, like there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. It's like I would say that's actually like, to me, I'd much rather do that than be an employee at a lot of places, So, but it was a blog post that was a 1-sentence blog post by Seth Godin many years ago. I don't remember when it was written, and the one sentence was, "It's okay to stop when you're happy." So scale isn't for everybody, right? Like some people, it's totally chill. Like, I've gotten to know like the plumber that like helped us when we were doing a renovation at our house. And it's like just a dude that owns his own business, and he has a phenomenal life. Like he gets to set his own hours. He can like work a ton and then like take 2 weeks off and go on a surf trip to Costa Rica. Like dude's probably in his 30s and just like really building a great bit. Now, if he wants to scale, he's building enough reputation that he could hire more people and get more vans and build a really big thing, or he can just keep doing what he's doing and he seems to be super happy, right? Like, so entrepreneurship is not always about scale. Although, I think that once someone gets the bug, a lot of times that's where it leads to. It's like, how could I do more of this? How could I help more people? Like, how could I create more jobs? These are all things that I think are part of like the entrepreneur's, dilemma, where it's like you could have a perfectly good, super happy life that you should just stop and be happy. But part of like what drives you is like you love creating, and creating is more than just, creating revenue. Sometimes it's legit. Like, I just want to create jobs, like I want to help the community I'm from. I want to be able to help more customers. I want to make a meaningful difference. I want to leave a legacy. Right. So if people have that bug, right? So again, stop whenever you're happy. But if it's like, how do I scale? I think the first thing that's most important is just understanding the total addressable market of whatever your business is. So, right, if it's my friend who's the plumber, right, he's a local business. He's in Orange County, California. He could look at the population, look at the ages of the homes, and kind of have an idea of like, okay, there's this many houses being built. There's this many older houses that are going to need to be repiped, like whatever the math would be. But he could probably do the math and say like, hey, within like a 30-mile drivable radius of wherever his home is, his addressable market is, X customers per year, and extrapolate that into revenue, and you measure it in revenue. And the reason why that's important is that some businesses just don't scale, right? Yep. Like the addressable market is just not big enough, and that's okay. Like, that just means like if you do that exercise and it's not a large enough addressable market, you can't realistically penetrate it and make something that really is big, then don't try to do it, right? Because you're gonna end up like, being pretty upset, if you take 5, 7, 10 years of grinding, to ultimately find out that this thing was never meant to scale in the first place. So I'd always start there. I mean, beyond that, like, it's, I didn't know this in my early days, but, I'd heard this. Now I really get it. But once hey, this could be big. Like, this has got a sizable enough, like, addressable market that it could be bigger than a one-man show, one woman show. So then the next thing is surround yourself with exceptional people. So the saying, I wish I remember who said it first, but you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Mm-hmm. So even if they're not employees, right? Find great mentors like that maybe have done what you've done and try to be around them, like be around other just successful entrepreneurs that like really maybe totally different industry, but like you can kind of model some of the things and learn from them. If you have people who are super pessimistic, like stay away from them, because entrepreneurship is hard, like sometimes, and like you actually need the last thing you need is somebody in your ear telling you that you're going to fail. Like, some people will say that motivates me back against the wall. I'm like, motivation is your road to misery. Like, if you need to be constantly motivated because of people threatening, the validity of your idea, that's a really lonely, high stress, like, kind of way to do it. So find really exceptional people to be around you. Those are like the 2 things I feel like are like must have, like non-negotiables, like if you want to build a successful business.
I think to add to that, I think like the 5 people you surround yourself is really important, not only for like that positivity and belief and everything else, but it's also like, businesses grow. Like, as you grow a business, you find new problems that you never even knew existed or were going to exist. And having 5 people around you that have been there before, have solved these problems, I think has been one of the most helpful things for us. I mean, we have like my dad, we can talk to you, we talk to Justin, we have all these people that are around us. They're like, hey, we've reached this problem. We don't really know what to do, but we know the person who's able to help us solve that problem. Because I mean, it can be a lonely road. You talk about a solo owner of a shop, like Trayton and I, at least we have each other to talk to and solve problems together. Like, it was a big reason why we built together, is because we didn't want to feel like that silo. So I love that point. I think it's important. And then going back to scale, I think that one's super interesting too, to think about, like, how much can you scale and what do you want to scale? Because you're talking about like, hey, when you're happy, you have enough. You sold a over $100 million business, still building more businesses. I think it's interesting. And I think it's hard with the goalposts always moving. I know that's me. Like, I know I have a goal. I try to accomplish it. I accomplish it. What's the next goal? Like, I think I'm always going to have to be doing it. I think it's hard to think through it because it really feels like a game. Like, I think there's jobs. And then I think building businesses feels like you're in this never ending game, and you can always take that game farther And, that's fun. Like, to be honest, it's super fun to be always doing that and solving problems and feeling valuable and thinking that there's something next to go other than hopefully 4 years from now, I get this promotion based on politics. Like, that's so different.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think in terms of like the challenge, like it reminds me, like, again, I wish I could remember like who to attribute this to, but like, I remember like early in my entrepreneur journey, like someone was saying like, hey, listen, like, and I forget what my revenue of my company was. Maybe it was like $1 million. And like, that was a huge deal to me. Like, whoa, $1 million in revenue or something, and this was like back in my 20s. But I didn't feel like that was anything. Like, I remember being like, well, I'm this guy over here, this other entrepreneur, he's got a $10 million business. And my friend was like, keep in mind that that person running the $10 million revenue business, like, they don't think their business is big either. Like, they think the person they know who has a $50 million one is big. And that person thinks someone who has 100 million, like, you always know someone who's like running a bigger business that's like creating a bigger impact. And so I think what's interesting about, I mean, unless you're like Elon Musk, I guess, like, there's always somebody who's doing better or more, and I don't think it's all about like a chase for wealth. I think what's like really interesting is a lot of the most successful entrepreneurs I know, um, personal wealth that they happen to achieve, it was never actually their original goal. Like, the people who are doing it for that, I think oftentimes really struggle. I think when it becomes more of like, this is a really intellectually challenging thing, like building something and scaling it and figuring out how to, like, how you hire great people, manage great people, like build like organizational structure that scales, like, that, dealing with the technical challenges, regulatory challenges, right? Like that stuff's like intellectually super stimulating, and that's what like certainly drives me, to do stuff. And I think most people I know that are really, really achieving high, like high growth, like highly impactful businesses, rarely ever go into it being like, I hope I get super rich, right? It's like never the case. So that sort of gamification of entrepreneurship, like it's more, again, not about like a chase for like more money. It's like, it's a chase for like more impact typically. How can I create more jobs? How can I what I'd really love is like, I'm from West Michigan. So like, I remember one of the things I was really, really proud of is we took like an old shitty building in downtown Grand Rapids, like, when the city was still kind of like going through a bit of a resurgence. And we took the entire top half of the building, like it was a 6-story downtown building. We took 3 floors of it, like poured millions of dollars into like making it one of the most cool office spaces in the entire area. Like, it felt like it was in Silicon Valley, and people loved working there. We created the highest minimum wage of any company in that town. So like, when we would post a job, we'd get hundreds of applicants. That was the type of stuff that like I thought was so cool about entrepreneurship. It's like, how can we help this community? How can we create like amazing jobs, bring new energy to an area that maybe wasn't getting a lot of attention? That stuff's fun, right? And it has nothing to do with like revenue or EBITDA or whatever, like CAGR, like, other businessy things, but like, it wasn't the motivation.
Yeah, I think that like finding that deeper meaning is super important, because you're right. Like, chasing money is, eventually that's going to get old. And the people, like, I mean, the energy that you exude as somebody that, like, the mission that you're behind is really, really cool. And I think that's where sometimes I think it'd be hard to start a business that's like, hey, these are good lifestyle businesses. You can make a good income, but like, you might be doing something that doesn't, stimulate you intellectually, doesn't really feel like a challenge. And I mean, what do you think about the advice from people of like, find that combination of something that you're really interested in and also like where your skill set lies? Because I know a lot of people who argue with that and say like, no, it's still a job. At the end of the day, get a job that can pay well. And like, if you get some enjoyment or like, it's something you kind of like, that's good. Because like for me, I'm like, I want to dive into something that I am fully believe is impactful. It's fun. It's challenging. Because if not, I realize I'm an average worker when I don't have that passion behind me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can say like, as an employer, that's exactly what you want to strive for. So when we look at using like my company today, Altruist, like we have a fast growing team, close to 300 people, growing at around 100 people a year. And if I'm going to go work for a company, like I want to I want to have like extremely high sort of conviction, like that this is a good place to be. I happen to, I have a bias, and and my bias is like, I'm a big believer in mission driven companies. So like, if I'm going to start a business, it better be hyper mission driven. I'm still, a pragmatist. So like, the math has to work. Like, it still has to, like, you can't just, it's not like a nonprofit, it's got to actually be a real business. But if you're going to be mission driven, that means like, people should be the center of your sort of corporate flywheel, like the quality of the people, the engagement, like their passion. And you can actually feel like an entrepreneur when you're part of a company like that. Like you have like, and obviously like if done right, like the company should make significant equity available to those people. So they really are stakeholders. Like they have like, real vested interest. You get a lot more out of like 10 people that are real passionate about something than like 20 cogs in a wheel, So yeah, whether you're the entrepreneur and you're looking, how do I create the environment that like is almost a viral entrepreneurship mindset, like across my entire organization, like you only get that if you get people highly convicted, typically in the mission of the organization, not the money of the organization, right? The mission of the organization. So,
Yeah.
Mhm. And I think a lot of people, just kind of going back to the beginning a little bit, like struggle with taking the leap into entrepreneurship in the first place, like just that friction of either leaving their 9 to 5 job or coming out of college and trying to start something. There's just a lot of friction there. And I know like you kind of hit on lifestyle design a little bit, and I just want to kind of talk through like what that very beginning phase of like starting your first business or kind of like the first successful one looked like. Cause I remember like, I can't remember which interview it was, but you talked about like taking on some credit card debt, and there's just like not any certainty that what you're doing is going to work. And just like kind of the mindset you had of like working through that uncertainty and just kind of staying with the mission no matter what the kind of like difficulty was at the time.
And real quick to add to that, like Trayton is honestly like a great example of this too. Like I think that deserves a shout out because there's so many people I talk to are scared. It's like, I'm not going to go launch my own business, or, I'll take the middle route, which is keep W-2 job, do side hustle, hope it grows, but they don't necessarily do it. Like Trayton was like, hey, I can't find a way to be in the industry. I have no experience. I'm just going to go launch and do it. And I'm going to figure it out. And like, to me, that's super cool because like, I didn't necessarily take that leap. Like, I think starting a business at 25 years old is definitely a leap, but I got to bring some clients over and like, my break even point was I didn't have to take credit card debt. I didn't have to touch my emergency fund. Like I'm interested to hear from you and how you took that leap, because that's not normal for people. It's a hard thing to do.
Well, so one of the things I have observed over the years, I think like one of the things that I would actually encourage people to do is like, look, I think if there's ever a time to start a business, do it as young as you can, like, because one of the things that limits a lot of people is opportunity costs, right? They'll be like, well, I make $100,000 at this job. And so I've become acclimated to living off $100,000 a year. And guess what? Yeah. When you're an entrepreneur, like you're probably not going to make $100,000 your first year. You might not make that for 2 or 3 or 4 years. So to me, the younger you are before you like acquire a bunch of, sort of like lifestyle creep, to go launch it, right? So for me, I started my first company, my first business, I guess I don't have to call it a company, when I was 21. And I jumped in head first, like, right. I quit my job at like a good job at like a major investment firm. And I moved back to Michigan and I started an internet website that was designed to help individuals make better 401k decisions. And the reason I did that was like, when I was working at a major firm that worked with mostly wealthy people, I thought, well, what's something that almost everybody has? Like if they have a job, like they have access to a 401k. So maybe I just start there and see if I can help people at that very like maybe earliest stage of like saving and investing, just help them with their 401ks, right? And it was a fully automated like subscription service. It's like $30 a month, and people could go in and pick which company they work for, go through like a little bit of a risk assessment and get a model portfolio that they could use in their 401k. And there was some algorithms that would like help them with like risk management. So like as they got older or life events happen, it would like, automatically kind of tell them, hey, rebalance into this change or whatever, right? So pretty simple concept. And it was a solo thing. I just worked at it from home. I had no idea if it was going to work. No one had ever really done that before. Like it was kind of like a new thing. And it actually worked pretty well. Like, I found I could acquire customers really low cost. Like this was back in the very early days of like, Google and Yahoo and Overture and like some search engines that don't exist anymore. But they existed back then, and you could do paid search for like pennies to drive traffic. So if people were looking for like 401k investment help or advice or whatever, right? Like there wasn't nobody was doing content back then, right? There was no YouTube, like nothing existed. There's no social media really. So you would buy ads, right? Send people to a landing page, convert them into a subscription. The learning was great for me because I learned about like the economics of running a business. I was very comfortable with math and technology, but like I had to like understand, well, how does client acquisition work? Like how does content creation work? Like how do you write sales copy? Like, you know, like this is all stuff I'd never done before. And it was a great learning experience. What I also learned the hard way was that it was a completely indefensible business. And what happened was search started taking off. Companies started bidding prices up. Before I knew it, the cost to acquire a new customer was more than what they were willing to pay. My churn rate, you know, the rate at which people canceled out of the service was really high. The average customer didn't even last 1 year. So I might get $30 a month for 9 months. So a customer would be worth $270. Once the acquisition cost got to $250, the business didn't work anymore. So there was a short time period though, where I was like, whoa, I'm acquiring customers for like $5 and they're paying me $30 a month. If I just keep doing this for like the next 30 years, like I'm going to be the richest person in the history of mankind, you know, but obviously math doesn't work linear like that. And I learned a lot of lessons. But it also is what then inspired me to start my first real business. And in 2004, I started a wealth management firm because what I learned was the biggest reason people were churning out of my subscription service was they were like, look, if you would just do it for me, then I'd pay you a lot more money than $30 a month. But like, I just don't have time to implement these things on my own, you know? And so I thought, well, how do you do that? Right. And maybe like Trey, like I basically was like, I don't know anything about like working with clients. Like I've never done financial planning necessarily, but I felt like, how hard can this be? Right. I was 24 years old and maybe 23. I don't know. But I know the year is 2004, you know, so I think I was 23. And I launched a firm, right? And it was ironically, I called it Retirement Wealth Advisors because what I also learned in my subscription 401k business was that the bulk of the customers that were coming in were like 50. Like they weren't actually all young people, which I thought was really strange at the time. So I thought, well, let me just help people with like retirement. Like I thought 401k equals retirement. This shows my naivety as an entrepreneur, but it was a killer learning experience. But that was like the early days, you know. And I will say that I still have them to this day because I always thought it'd be something kind of fun to look back on. But I kept back in the day, the Social Security Administration would send you physical statements every year of like what your Social Security benefits would be based on your income. So it would show you year by year your income. And it was wild because it'd be like, I could see like the year I was 16, you know, and be like, oh, you made $800 that year or whatever. But like years like 21 to 25, like I was making like $18,000 a year, you know, like it was a poverty wage basically. And I was like, I had a small family, right? Like I had a baby, like in, you know, in a girlfriend. And like, I mean, like,
so what kept you going?
Well, so interestingly, like, you know, like I talk about, you know, a pragmatist, or like a math person, and some things like, some things have compounding effects, right? Like, and I think like financial services happens to be one of those areas where like, it does have a very compounding kind of element. So I knew going into it, I was like, okay, like, yeah, maybe I'm only going to have like a few $1,000s of like monthly revenue. And like that, my expenses were almost that much, you know, like, you know, like, but I was like, but I know that like the revenue number keeps going up. Like, and my expenses were largely pretty fixed actually, because it was a solo business time. I didn't have like employees. Like my biggest expenses were like some software and licensing and, you know, kind of like, you know, core operational expenses. And so I just knew like I had like this like line of sight, and I was like, I can tell like how this will compound in, you know, because each year it's a reoccurring revenue model. So anybody who's building like subscription businesses, software set, you know, businesses, things like that, like if you can create reoccurring revenue, like each year the revenue just kind of compounds on the prior year's revenue. And so I knew it was going to work. Like I had 100% conviction it was going to work. I knew it would take a little bit of time, but to do it right, like I had to lay the foundation. The great irony is that, like, and this is definitely not a braggadocious comment, but it's to show like the power of compounding. Like, you know, at age 24, like when I probably made $20,000 or something, I also remember that at age 27, I made $500,000, right? So 3 years later, like that's how much it compounded to. And, you know, and that was a long time ago, by the way, like that was 2007 or 8, you know? So, you know, with inflation, I don't know, that's like $1 million probably by now, but the point simply is that like, usually like overnight success stories, they take 5 to 10 years, you know, and that was like how mine worked. Like, you know, like the first business was just like ideator for the second business. And then the second business took 5 years of, frankly, 100 hours a week, like, you know, like super like discipline, like focus, and execution, and a lot of luck, you know, like I realized like I'm very lucky too. So, you know, I think all those things being the case though, never did I think about giving up, because I knew the way the math would work out if I stayed committed to it. I believed in what I was doing and the service I was providing to the customers. And it turns out that the risk was worth it. You know, it definitely paid off.
Yeah. And I mean, like one of the big keys that I saw is it started with solving a problem that you saw from somewhere else prior. It wasn't just like this random idea that came out of nowhere. It's like, oh, I think this could maybe work. Like there was a little bit of like, not necessarily like product market fit, but it's something that could be there. And then I don't think you hit on it here, but one of the reasons you pivoted was because you had exit customer surveys on the subscription platform. So then you knew like what people would kind of prefer in a service. And then that allowed you to pivot into the service and the business that kind of scaled up from there. So just like the importance of like actually solving problems and then getting feedback on like your customers. And that definitely helps with business growth. For
I mean,
sure.
the third step was believing in himself and knowing that, like, hey, you know, it's going to take a little bit of time. And I think those realistic expectations are huge, because obviously you could tell, you knew like, hey, in the beginning, this is going to be slow. My expenses are fixed. I might not get paid a bunch, but once I get past there and this starts to compound, this can be a really great business. Because what I find is so many people come in with such unreal expectations. Like you see the Shark Tanks, you see all these other things. They're like, you know, hey, year one, we can hit 200K in revenue. And like most businesses are underwater in year one, probably even year two. Coming in knowing that is a lot. It helps you actually stick with it. Then like, we're going to be this overnight success. Everybody's going to want our product. There's a need for it. It's like a need for the product isn't necessarily enough. You have to have great marketing in a way to get people in. And I think a lot of people kind of forget about that.
Yeah, and one thing I say, like, you know, so I don't want to like, I think you said like I had a great belief in myself. Look, I was willing to bet on myself, because I remember like an early friend of mine named Ron Trost. He used to have this saying, and he's like the hardest working dude I ever met in my life. You know, and it just so focused and hardworking. And I remember being like, man, Ron, like how do you do it, man? Like how do you not worry, like, you know, about failure? Like, you know, like you're just out here like just hustling like every day, you know. And he's like, hey, look, it's the only thing I can control. I can't control anything else, actually, but I can control how much effort I put into what I do. So if I'm going to do it, whether he was going to the gym, the dude was like the most jacked guy in the gym, because like he was like, I'm not going to spend 30 minutes here dicking around. Like I'm going to go here and like get the work done. If I'm going to be in the office for 8 hours, I'm not going to take a water cooler break for an hour and a half, goofing off with my colleagues. Like I'm just going to go to work and work hard and diligent. Like, so I remember like in the earliest for me, like the thing that I believed in was, I was like, okay, if I fail, it will not because I didn't work hard and be for lack of effort. But what I really believed in was the math, right? So you have to keep in mind that, like, you know, I'm a mathematician, computer scientist, like at heart, like, and I knew the math of what I was doing. And I understood that, like, okay, I won't fail because of my lack of effort. And I know I believe in the math. And so if I take those two things and put them together, like with enough time, like 2 to 3 years of like consistent, you know, effort, like this will work, right? And so it wasn't like an arrogance thing, because I know some people, they go like business for themselves and they're like, yeah, I'm betting on myself. And it's like, oh, you know, good luck, you know, with that. Like, I mean, make sure like the math works, you know, because like doesn't matter how confident you are. Like if it's a shitty business idea, like it's a shitty business idea, like it's not going to work. So you know, those are the same reasons why like I accumulated a bunch of debt, right? I spent through every penny I had saved, which wasn't much. I had like 20 grand saved, spent all that, and then racked up like 35 grand in credit card debt, like, you know, like to make ends meet, like during those early years. And there was a bunch of times where I was living in my overdraft. Like, you know, I remember I had a $600 overdraft, and eventually I got married. I remember my wife being like, hey, can we have like some friends over this weekend? I would like look in the bank account, and I'd be like, we only have like $18 left in the overdraft. So like I legit can't even buy enough food to make another couple food to have them over for dinner this weekend. So no, we got $18 left. And it wasn't like my $18. It was like the last $18 of credit that I had, you know? So it'd be like a couple $2 pizzas, you know, and like that was the meal for the weekend, you know. But so it's I think though, like you know, I don't want people to go out there and be stupid and like just rack up tons of debt and like be like, oh, that's how you become successful. Like there's a lot more to it. But again, if you believe in the math and you're willing to put in the work, you're willing to sacrifice, maybe it's 2, 3, 4 years. Like that's, frankly, how it worked for me. Now I do know people who had businesses that were successful earlier. I know people that took a lot longer. But the thing that's consistent with almost every great business that I've seen is the effort part. And obviously the math had to work for it to become successful at some point. I've seen lots of them that don't work because of a combination of it was never a good business in the first place and the person didn't work hard. And then they're like jaded, entrepreneurship doesn't work. It's like, well, it's all relative.
And I love the advice of like starting young, because I think like it's almost seems the scariest because you are young and you have the least amount of expertise. So then people are like, well, I'm going to wait till later. But then when later is you have a house and you have kids and you have a wife, like in a higher salary, it's harder to do it. But like, let's be real. If you start a business, like for us, my thought was like, if I go start a business and I fail, I'm going to have a job anywhere I want anyways. Like the experience that you gain is like, you're no longer a financial planner. You've had to learn how to market, be a financial planner, service, process, like planning, like everything. You're going to learn way more. I've learned way more in this last 7 months than I learned all of college by far, my first year of work, like everything. You have no choice but to learn. And sometimes like throwing yourself in the fire and learning by doing I don't know if there's very many things that you can do to set yourself up better to advance your knowledge.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And interestingly, like later in life, I know, my latest, entrepreneurship, like I kicked this off at 38 years old. And yeah, I had like a mortgage and a family and, I had the oldest son was getting ready to go to college, right? And the weird part is like, at that point, like the opportunity cost for me was like, I had a really successful business. But I wanted to do something that I was even more passionate about. And it still was a big risk. Like I still had to be like, man, I'm going to walk away from something I spent 8 years building that's wildly successful so that I can go do something from scratch that may fail, right? Like it may not work, right? And that's a lot harder to your point when you're like late 30s and you've got all of this lifestyle stuff you've gotten used to. Now it's offset if you have some financial stability that, fortunately the other businesses were successful enough that I had some, a fallback plan, if you will. But I always feel bad for people who, come up with 100 ideas between their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, and they never, ever take the chance to try to execute one of them. It's a shame.
It's interesting because for us, like we've came up with too many ideas. Like what we realized, and like your focus is like when we first started out, like we were building websites, we're helping people with marketing, like consulting, planning, and it was great, to be honest. Like it was super fun. But now we've just come to realize that like, we can be good at all those things, but what we're best at is building this business. And we're going to put the focus behind that, at least for the next while. It's not that we don't want to like spend the attention there, but I give this advice to advisors, everybody else. It's like, hey, you're going to create content. Like, how about you find one area you can do well at and then expand? But what happens with too many people is we have all these ideas, we chase all of them, and we become average at all of them. Mm-hmm. Instead of like, you found your thing, you went full down, years into it, built it to be amazing. Then you move on to your next. You were really good at that. Now, what skill set do you bring into here? How do you build that? And I love the focus that you have. And I think, that's a good reminder for us, especially as entrepreneurs. Like there's just so many ideas that we have. And sometimes you got to stay in the lane of like, where can you provide the most value?
Yeah. Learning how to say no is pretty important. And not just like in business, but like, you're going to find obviously, we all do as life goes on, like hopefully, right. If we work hard and we're good at what we do, like we're presented with a lot of opportunities, right? But how many do you choose to say yes to versus say no to, right? You can't say yes to everything. Or you spread yourself, like super thin and you're like wildly ineffective at lots of stuff. And that never ends, by the way. Like, older and more successful you get, like the more opportunities that present themselves, and you have to get really disciplined at saying no. I know Tim Ferriss wrote a blog post on this years ago where he essentially got to a point where he's like, I'm going to say no to everything for a year. Like, it's going to be the year of no. Like, I just don't want any more stuff on my plate. And every once in a while doing that, like, is super liberating. And actually it does allow you to be much more effective at the things you're working on. So, I always hate missing the great opportunities like anyone else, but like at the end of the day, time is a strangely finite, thing. And once it's gone and you never get it back, the last thing I want to do is have spent 10 years of my life, like essentially making no progress because I never was committed to anything long enough for it to actually turn into something meaningful. And as an entrepreneur, like, first of all, time goes by pretty fast, so like, it's wild. You look back and I'm like, whoa, like my current company, I've been building it for 3 years. I still feel like it's like, whatever, like the third week, it's so fresh and exciting and fun. I love every single day that I get to do what I do. But yeah, when you like look back at it, at some point you'll be like, whoa, I can hardly believe it's been whatever, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years sometimes. And with businesses, like I forget, like, where I read this recently, but for most businesses to really reach like their sort of like mature, steady state, it takes 10 years. 10 years is sort of like how long it takes. Even big companies that we look at today and sometimes think like, wow, they must have always had their shit together. But like, you look at like Amazon's history, the first 10 years, like you never knew if they was going to really make it, and it didn't really become anything close to what it is today until well after 10 years past founding. And I think that's like, true of even small businesses, local businesses, service businesses, right? Like they don't reach kind of a point of real maturity and sort of steady state kind of operating until, in the neighborhood of 10 years in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I know you got to run. You got to have some lunch before this next meeting.
Sure.
Thanks for not saying no to us and giving us so much of your time. Like, I mean, you gave us 45
Well,
minutes.
remember, surround yourself with great people, and there's a thing I would say too, is if you have any older listeners, not that I'm like super old, but I'm definitely older than y'all. But I'd say like, always make time for young people, like the young people that are doing big things. Like, we as humans, like whether we choose to admit it or not, like the older we get, the more biases we form, and eventually we lose our creativity, right? And this is part of like guys like Elon Musk will say, this is why people should never strive to live forever, because eventually if we live forever, everyone would be the same, right? We would all create like these like old stodgy versions of ourselves. You have to have like new ideas. And so like one of the things I think is just, this is why I love being around entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs, right, that are doing cool things. So absolutely love being on. Appreciate like you guys inviting me and sharing your audience, and certainly wish you nothing but the best.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening, and please don't forget to rate and subscribe, and we'll see you back next week.